Once you put the circular goggles on, it's really hard to see the world in another way.
Welcome back to Infrastructure Connections, the podcast where we explore what makes sustainable infrastructure work, brought to you by the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. I'm your host, Seth Scott, and today we'll be talking about the circular economy with our guest, Lisa McLean. Lisa is the Managing Director and CEO of Circular Australia, an independent peak body for circular economy innovation. She advises industry and governments on new policy frameworks and regulations enabling the circular zero carbon economy over the next 20 years. Well, hi, Lisa. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Seth. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Just to get started, I noticed you've been involved in carbon and circularity for a long time now, so it can get frustrating. What continues to inspire you about this area?
I think that circularity is optimistic. As I said before, the circular economy transition is very optimistic. Our young people and emerging businesses, people need hope. They need to know that there is going to be a rich, diverse planet that they can enjoy with natural capital and trees and biodiversity and other creatures other than humans on it. They need to know that it'll be a safe world, aside from the geopolitics and wars, but that there'll be not contaminants in waterways, that creatures and living things won't be dying because of old-fashioned practices and lazy legislation. So I think circular economy is very optimistic. As I said to you, it does mean we need to rethink things because we're wasting 90% of the stuff that we use and make, food and products. We use it once and off it goes to landfill, we burn it, or it's out of our reach and we can't use it again. So it really means we can decouple our economic growth from the consumption of finite resources because there's so much waste. If we didn't have 90% waste, we couldn't do this, but we do. And we have very inefficient productivity. So productivity is low, particularly in Australia. Materials efficiency is low for these exact reasons. And people are overwhelmed with waste in their homes and packaging in their homes, and they want new ways to do things. So the optimism comes in with these new approaches. Fashion as a service. We know it worked with lighting as a service. We know it worked with mobility as a service. How can we get fashion as a service? Instead of buying garments, we can rent them and they're high quality. Maybe we would never have been able to afford them in the first place if we tried to buy them. They can go back. They create jobs by getting repaired and they get used. If you own that garment and you're leasing it out, instead of selling it once, you'll sell it over and over again. You'll sell that service over and over again. So circular economy through as a service models, for example, can really drive down the price point for the consumer and it can increase revenues for the company that with that service. So it is optimistic. It's also, Seth, a framework through which we can, one, design out waste and pollution, two, keep materials in the economy at their highest value. So don't turn a glass into road fuel, turn it back into a glass. And three, regenerate natural systems. So there's not many economic models, if any, other than donut economics and circular economics, that allows us to do those things, to grow an economy while protecting and enhancing nature.
So that's the goal, but right now we're at about, 4 to 5% circularity rate?
In Australia, we are globally at 6.9%, and you're right, it's going backwards.
And how do we get to that number? What's in that number?
So every 18 months to 2 years, Circular Economy, which is a think tank in the Netherlands with Deloitte, have put out a circular gap analysis, a circularity gap analysis. And what that shows us is how the world is performing in terms of taking secondary resources and getting them back into the economy. And it shows colossal waste. It shows 90% waste of more than 90% waste. We started at about 9% in 2018, and now then we're about 7.2% 18 months ago, and now we're at 6.9%. And that's the amount of secondary resources that are actually going back into the economy. There are some optimistic signs this year. And so firstly, to explain why we're going backwards, Our economies are in a J curve of growth globally. The hot economies of the South, big countries that are coming out of poverty, consuming more, bigger middle class, means that there's a surge in material consumption and this take, make, waste approach to products. So the levers and the policies that we are seeing in circular economy, and we are seeing some progress globally with countries introducing legislations and policies. 75% of our trading partners have them in the G20, for example. But the reason why is we can't keep up with that surge in growth. So we are making progress, but it's not fast enough. Secondly, recycling is increasing. So we are seeing more infrastructure, and we have got an opportunity. We're getting close to sort of 20%, if we can get a few more industries in, of recycling globally, which is good. So that is a growth area.
What's the bulk of that 5-6% that we're actually achieving now?
Well, if we flip it on its head, the areas we're not achieving is in the built environment. Imagine there's a huge housing agenda in Australia and construction agenda in Australia. And we, with 1.2 million homes to be built in the next however many few years. And so that construction, the built environment has a lot of waste. It oversources supplies of tiles and timber and all those things that go into building a house. And it oversources that because if it undersources it, it's time delays, and time delays are cost. So often there's a lot of redundancy that's built in terms of material use. So we're not going so well in the built environment. Some areas that we have looked at Circular Australia with huge economic opportunity for Australia, there's 5 areas that we've looked at. One is green steel, one is low carbon cement, another is PET plastics, and then we've also got textiles and lithium. Now, in Australia, we have a simple economy, unfortunately. We rank lower than Uganda on the Complex Economic Index. So we simply dig up resources, we sell them not for much and not for the benefit of a lot of people, and then we import everything, and then we either burn or landfill or export it back overseas for that residual value to be utilised. So what we looked at Circular Australia in our Circular Markets report released last year was, what does the dark arts of supply chains look like? What if we mapped where all this lithium is going? At the moment, most of it goes offshore, or it's lost value in e-waste and other things that are landfilled. But if we could get our hands on that and change that value chain, make it circular for 2035, there's a $3 billion economic opportunity to extract lithium. There's a similar massive opportunity in PET plastics. And we are seeing companies like Coca-Cola, which has got a weight on its shoulders and a responsibility for plastic waste, achieving really good outcomes with return and earn schemes. This is one area that is working, where we're seeing plastic bottles going back to be plastic bottles through infrastructure that's coming online, and collecting the aluminium and collecting those containers, and it's creating jobs. And that model of container deposit scheme is going to be really, really important, Seth, for other industries. And we're starting to see battery recycling piggybacking off those locations, wine bottles coming in and other containers potentially coming in. So the collection is a really big part of this transition. We're just not going to get there if we don't have the infrastructure and systems to, one, collect the waste we're creating so that we can recycle it and remanufacture it, upcycle it, remanufacture it, and 2, alternative services so people don't have to consume it from the start. They can use less have less products and materials in their home, but still have their needs met.
That was my next question, is what are the structural barriers to circular economy? Is it the actual manufacturing plants that can recycle the materials, or is it regulations, or is there something else in the way?
I think the number one is the lack of harmonised legislation. So we have fragmented legislation and regulation across states. So they're not truly valuing secondary resources as they should be. And they're also not harmonising procurement, which is a big lever for government, to activate a circular economy, if government can use its purchasing power to send a message to the market through procurement, it's a big step forward. But we're just seeing fragmented approaches to that. Taxation policy is another big one. I mean, we need to tax the externalities. Of course, there's been lots of discussion about a carbon tax. These become more and more important to send the right message to industry and government. And I must say, this current administration has, really rapidly moved us forward with circularity. It set up the Ministerial Advisory Group on Circular Economy, which I was part of, chaired by John Thwaites. They also, we finished that consultation approach with industry, more than 200 industry groups. Who all want to be regulated. And then the federal government released its framework at the end of last year's Australia Circular Economy Framework, and it has got some strong targets in there. Yes, we want to double our circularity rate, which will only bring us to around 8-9% by 2035. But in there is a really important target to improve our materials efficiency and materials consumption. Not many countries around the world have got targets around improving material consumption. So the framework is a really good start. We need an act. We need harmonise the states with that procurement and other options to really ensure regulatory and standards are equal around the states, so that companies can plug and play in our massive geographic region and smaller population. Then we also need an act, a Circular Economy Act, that can replace the waste legislation. And that act is there to set strong design standards for so that things can be made to last, they can be made to be repaired, that the IP to repair them is publicly available. And we saw during COVID, respirators locked in cupboards that were broken and couldn't be fixed. People actually died because that IP wasn't available. The screwdrivers and the IP and whatever weren't available to fix those respirators. So we need design standards that will ensure that there's no toxic things in these products in the beginning. Otherwise, we'll be a dumping ground, as the other countries have legislation that stops PFAS and microplastics and other nasties, forever chemicals in products. And then the other thing is, of course, we need to be looking at place-based circularity. We need infrastructure and systems to activate circularity. So we need a place, like that example I gave before with CCEP, Coca-Cola Europe Pacific, doing its return and earn schemes with other partners. We need places where new businesses can actually process waste streams that would otherwise go to landfill. They might be dangerous, they might be slightly toxic, and we need safe places for them to be processed, to have their value maintained, to get them back into the market. And so remanufacturing and recycling and other things as well.
So a big part of that you mentioned is targets, and that requires a lot of data. Where do we see that being collected for inputs, outputs, and waste right now?
So interestingly, the data's there. It's just we need to pull it together in the right ways. And at the moment, Circular Australia is about to release a really exciting, our latest report, which is with Mercer and our Finance and Investment Task Force with Commonwealth Bank and others. And this report is a guide for investors and a guide for lenders. And what we've discovered, and we've for the first time brought together embodied carbon data with data sets and metrics on which we can actually measure the circularity of sectors and businesses. And I think there's been a lot of fear around this. We've got the disclosure requirements now for financial institutions around environmental, nature positive and net zero. And there's been an apprehension, we have to add circularity to this. Well, circularity actually sits above it all, because we're not going to get to net zero without looking at the embodied carbon and looking at circular strategies. And in a similar way, we're not going to be able to grow economies effectively with the same linear model. It will have an impact on nature. So Mercer has brought together, in partnership with Footprint Lab and ISXO and other big organisations, data organisations, to crunch some numbers and demonstrate it is possible for actually us to put metrics and data sources to look under the hood and see how sectors are performing when it comes to circularity. And the ones that aren't performing typically are overinvested in linear models, and that's something that they're going to have to change to thrive in a resource and carbon constrained future. And I just also want to add that there's now also ISOs. The ISO international standards have introduced the 59,000 series, which is 59,010, 59,020, and 59,004, which are really powerful guidance for businesses and organisations on metrics and how to measure circularity. And Circular Australia also has its own metrics, which we produced with UTS, Institute of Sustainable Futures. So the metrics are there and the data is also there. What we don't have is application, operationalizing circularity, and really us rolling our sleeves up and getting on with this.
Right. Well, you'd mentioned having a safe space for this activity to occur. Is that what you mean by a circular precinct, or what is that?
That's correct. So that's exactly what Circular Australia has been very focused on. We have a task force, which is precincts and infrastructure. We put out a report last year with Oricon, a guide on how to activate circular precincts and the evidence as to why we need them and why they're important. And we're seeing circular hubs or precincts emerging in Europe. We're seeing the big economic hubs of France and Germany and the Netherlands and other countries, Norway, embrace circular standards through the UNIDO certification, which is industrial symbiosis certification, which is looking at how they can share water, share energy, share utilities, take waste streams and make them resources for new products. So this really important synergies, which sounds like efficiencies and productivity, which it is, but it's also designing out waste. We're seeing that model starting to apply in Australia, in Western Australia, and then also New South Wales government is setting up the special activation precincts, and those special activation precincts at parks and Wagga will be UNIDO certified. So, it's really important that we have places that are safe, and understand the principles of circularity and how to apply them safely in these precincts. And it is a bit about building these spaces so businesses can come there and operate in a way that's going to be more sustainable and productive. But I think to start with, there's really obvious demonstrated, downward pressure on utility costs, water, energy, if you're sharing space, sharing energy. And then the opportunity to co-locate, for example, which Parks is doing, where, waste, food waste is used to feed fish farming, which can then be used for pet food, and so it goes on. So those sorts of synergies are, that industrial symbiosis piece is going to be a really big one. But then there's also other precincts that aren't industrial symbiosis that are safe places for the processing of waste streams. And I mentioned CDS locations. There's also precincts that can be local community gardens. They can be precincts of natural capital that are connected together by several tiers of government to really enhance biodiversity, amenity for communities, and improve carbon sinks.
Are there any manufacturers that are really showing that they can do this?
Yes. Well, I think of one example, actually. It's just a small regional company that was involved in a program we did with St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. Right in the middle of COVID, we helped St Vincent's Hospital collect needle caps and ampules. And it was a really difficult time. It was considered an unsafe waste stream in an unsafe time during COVID, but we managed to do this trial. And the plastics, which are barely touched, a very high quality PET, were turned into wind farm components and roller door wheels by Allmould Plastics out at Orange. And that company's growing. It's just a regional company, but what we demonstrated in that trial is that there's enough revenue and savings to hire 41 nurses if hospitals looked at changing their processes with that one waste stream. So I think the benefits are there's lots and lots of benefits. There's Blocktex, which is taking fashion waste with Virgin, for example, their uniforms, and turning them into pulp and organic farming materials. We're seeing IQ Renew on the Central Coast handling about 70% of plastic waste from Sydney, moving into organics. And so there's lots of examples, and certainly our members as well, that are applying circularity. And we did actually in our conference, Seth, on Tuesday, our Australian Circular Economy Forum, in our precincts one, we looked at a precinct that's established, which was Bega Valley, which is a brilliant example of Bega Group supporting circularity in that valley. And we looked at emerging precincts, which is Sustainability Victoria, an arm of government in Victoria, which has set up regional precincts. Then we looked at an activating precinct, which is actually in the Illawarra, and we're helping them with other players and 4 tiers of government and big industry down there to turn that region into a circular precinct, but they've just started the journey. And then we looked at an aspirational precinct, and we crossed down to the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia with a whole lot of industries and people who really want to do this and they want to start. So I feel like that's kind of the scale at the moment. There's a lot of wanting to activate and activating, but established is still small.
Sounds like there's a lot of opportunity there. I mean, you quoted the fact that there's more gold and silver in a ton of iPhones than there is in a gold or silver mine. Do you see circularity as a form of mining at this point? And when do we get to the point when we actually get to mine landfills, for example?
I think it's absolutely an emerging business, and we'd be crazy not to. We're running out. I mean, our critical minerals list grows every year. We're going to need a huge amount of them to achieve net zero. We need to secure those critical minerals for our own development. And so, how do we keep them on shore? How do we get processing to extract them? And obviously, one of our members, Circle, is Australia's biggest critical minerals recycler. They are actually have investment from a mining company. So, when I was in Brazil for the World Circular Economy Forum, we saw the really smart mining companies looking at how they can partner with urban miners, is what we call those recycling of minerals out of e-waste and other things. How can they partner with urban mining companies to de-risk their investment and also extract that really productive output. And again, it comes back to over-investing in infrastructure that's not going to be fit for the future. And you imagine mining is still very specific, even they smash up and do a lot of damage to natural resources to extract one thing when there's lots of other resources there that could also be harnessed. So I think the modernisation of that sector is something they'll all be very focused on. The Minerals Council of Australia is very interested in circularity and one of the key stakeholders for the CMAG report, development of the CMAG report.
What's the one thing you think our average listener can do to get started on this circular economy path?
I just learn about it, because once you put the circular goggles on, it's really hard to see the world in another way. So I would recommend training programs. Circular Australia offers some. There's others you can read about it, read some of these reports, and then look at some of the businesses and what they're doing. And you do have a choice. So, think about if you've got lots of fashion consumers in your household, can you get a subscription for fashion as a service, for example? And also, do we always need to own something? Can we borrow it? Can we share it? I think these are perspectives we can all think about. And products now are coming onto the market, so you've got a bit of a choice. Look around, look for the products that are recycled, look for the products that are making an effort to have reduced packaging and a smaller footprint.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Steph. It was delightful talking to you.
Thank you for listening to Infrastructure Connections. Please follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment below on what you think of this topic in this episode. We'd love to hear your feedback. Meanwhile, stay tuned for the next episode of Infrastructure Connections.